Last video, we introduced the concept of price elasticity of demand and the calculation of the price elasticity of demand coefficient. In this video, I want to take some time to talk about the drivers behind price elasticity of demand. Why do some goods face more elastic demand, meaning they're more sensitive to changes in price, and why are other goods seemingly more insensitive to change in price or face more inelastic demand? I'm Mr. Racine. Welcome to today's episode of
Economics videos that don't suck.
Legal disclaimer. This is a table that represents some real-world price elasticity of demands calculated in a number of studies over time. Sources for this data are included in the comments section of this video. As a brief review, take a look at the table. Which of these products face more elastic demand, and which of the products face relatively inelastic demand? And what does that mean? Remember that when the price elasticity of demand coefficient is less than 1, then we say demand for that good is inelastic. We can see from the table that things like physician services, toothpicks, and gasoline face inelastic demand as their PED coefficients are less than 1. Restaurant meals, Chevrolet automobiles, and fresh tomatoes, on the other hand, face more elastic demand as their PED coefficients are greater than 1. So the question is, why do some of these goods face more elastic demand than others? Let's consider gasoline, which we see faces more inelastic demand with a PED coefficient of 0.2. This suggests that if the price of gasoline were to increase by 50%, then we would only see a 10% decrease in the quantity demanded of gasoline. Why might consumers be less sensitive to changes in the price of something like gasoline? Well, gasoline is a necessity. If you own a car, you need it if you want to go anywhere. It has a higher degree of necessity. So the first factor that affects price elasticity of demand is degree of necessity. If it's a very necessary thing and consumers have a difficult time reducing the quantity they consume in the face of a price increase, then we would expect demand to be inelastic. We can see from the table that physician services, which is just doctors, also faces very inelastic demand, probably for the same reason. On the other hand, restaurant meals are really more of a luxury and not a necessity. I mean, you can always eat in at home, right? As a result, restaurants face more elastic demand because they really don't have the same degree of necessity as doctors or gasoline. When a good is very, very, very necessary, like for example, insulin, which is a medicine used to treat diabetes, we might expect demand over a certain range to be perfectly inelastic, right? Meaning that if the price of insulin goes up by 10%, you know what? Diabetics still need insulin. They're not going to decrease the quantity that they buy at all. And similarly, if the price of insulin goes down, hopefully you don't have a bunch of people saying, woohoo, I can just eat donuts all the time because insulin is cheaper, right? No, they're going to consume the same quantity of insulin. So over a certain price range, we would expect insulin to face perfectly inelastic demand because of the high degree of necessity. Okay, what about toothpicks? These things don't face a very high degree of necessity at all, but they also have pretty inelastic demand, meaning that if the price of toothpicks goes up by a lot, we don't expect quantity demanded to fall by that much. Why might this be? How much do toothpicks cost? I had to look this up, but right now, Amazon has a pack of 2,000 toothpicks selling for $6, which comes to 0.3 cents per toothpick. That's not super expensive. If the price of toothpicks tripled, one toothpick still costs less than a penny. A penny per toothpick, I mean, that's not going to break the bank for me, and I don't earn a high salary. If I'm buying toothpicks and I need them and the price of toothpicks triples, I'd probably still buy them. It's not a big proportion of my total budget. As a result, I'm not super sensitive to changes in its price, even if those changes are quite large percentage-wise. So the second factor that determines a good or service's price elasticity of demand is proportion of budget. What percentage of consumers' budget does the price of the goods or service take up? If it's a relatively cheap product that takes up a small proportion of consumers' budget, then consumers are going to be less sensitive to changes in price and demand will be more inelastic. If it's a product that takes a much larger proportion of one's income, then we would expect consumers to be more sensitive to changes in price and demand to be more elastic. We could also consider two different types of consumers: an investment banker who earns $600,000 a year and a service worker who earns $30,000 a year. We would expect the banker to have more inelastic demand for most goods, as all of these goods are taking a smaller proportion of his total income. The price of the ring doubled from $2,000 to $4,000? Well, if you're an investment banker and you earn $50,000 a month, that price increase might not be such a big deal. But if you only earn $2,500 a month, like our service worker, then that really might make that wedding ring unaffordable. Okay, so we have degree of necessity and percentage of budget or percentage of income. What about fresh tomatoes? We can see that fresh tomatoes face really elastic demand, meaning that if prices rise, quantity demanded for fresh tomatoes is going to fall by quite a lot. Why might this be? Let's say I go into the store and I'm looking for some tomatoes for my spaghetti sauce recipe, and I see that the price of fresh tomatoes has increased. I could consider going to the canned aisle and picking up a couple of cans of canned tomatoes, right? They're almost the same thing. So, because there are some close substitutes to fresh tomatoes available in the supermarket, it's very easy for me to switch from the consumption of fresh tomatoes to the consumption of canned tomatoes when the price of tomatoes goes up. As a result, the third thing that affects PED for goods and services is the number and closeness of available substitutes. If there are a lot of close substitutes for the good, demand for the good is going to be much more elastic because consumers can very quickly and easily substitute away from the product to other substitutes when the price of the good goes up. We can see that Chevrolet automobiles face relatively elastic demand. One of the reasons for this is there's a lot of substitutes for Chevy automobiles. Ford, Jeep, Tesla, Toyota, right? There's lots. On the other hand, if there are few or no close substitutes, then we would expect demand to be very inelastic. And finally, let's go back to gasoline. This price elasticity of demand coefficient number that I showed you was actually the short-term PED for gasoline of 0.2. In the long run, the price elasticity of demand coefficient has been calculated as 0.7. Still inelastic, but more elastic than the number we calculated for the short run. Why might consumers be more sensitive to changes in price in a longer time period? Let's say I limp into the gas station with my needle on E on gas fumes, and I see that the price of gasoline has doubled. What do? I still have to get gas, right? Like, I might buy a little bit less and not fill up my tank, but I'm still buying gas at this point. But if the price of gas stays high in the long run, I might then adjust my consumption habits. I might take the bus more, or ride my bike more often, or carpool with coworkers in an effort to reduce my expenditures on gas. So, the longer the time period we consider after a price change, the more opportunity consumers have to adjust their consumption habits. So we expect demand to become more elastic in a longer time period. Okay, so these have been the determinants of price elasticity of demand. Why are some goods more sensitive to changes in price while the demand for others is relatively insensitive? And we came up with 4 different determinants. The first is degree of necessity. If a good or service has a high degree of necessity, you really need it, physician services, gasoline, we expect demand to be inelastic. If a good or service is more of a luxury and is not really very necessary, then we expect demand to be more elastic. Second, number and closeness of substitutes. If there are a lot of close substitutes for the good, then we expect demand to be elastic. If the price of a good goes up, but it's very easy for consumers to switch to other substitutes, they're going to do so, and demand is going to be more elastic. If, on the other hand, there are no close substitutes, and there's only one firm selling the product, like in a monopoly, which will come later, then we would expect demand to be much more inelastic. 3, proportion of income. If a good or service takes up a larger proportion of the consumer's income, then we would expect demand to be more elastic. Consumers are more sensitive to changes in price. If the good or service takes up a small proportion of consumers' budget, then we would expect demand to be more inelastic, as consumers are going to be less sensitive to changes in price because it doesn't really affect them as much. And finally, the time period that is considered. The longer the time period we consider after a price change, the more elastic we expect demand to become as consumers adjust their consumption habits. Okay, next video we're going to consider how could producers use the concept of price elasticity of demand. Specifically, we're going to look at how might total revenues that producers earn from selling their good change when they change price, and we'll see that that is going to be determined by the price elasticity of demand for their product. See you there. Hey, what's going on? I hope you liked this video and it helped clarify some of the stuff you're working on in your current economics studies. If you're looking for more resources to help you with AP Economics, IB Economics, intro-level university economics, economics teaching resources, 1, go check out our website, Economics Videos That Don't Suck, evtds.com, for access to our entire catalog of economics videos, as well as practice questions, answers, and even entire mock exams. 2, be sure to subscribe to this channel, Economics Videos That Don't Suck, so you can get immediate access to all of our new videos as they're released, probably mirroring your economic studies right now.